Tuesday, November 26th, 4:30. We'll start with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Mylum?
Here.
Councilmember Burnt?
Here.
Councilmember Palmer?
Here.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Here.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Here.
Mayor DeVere?
Here. Item 2 is adoption of the agenda.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Cavanagh.
Thank you. We're going to move item 3I to Department and Committee reports. I'd like to renumber that as item 5D1. And with that, I move we would adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as changed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes. Item 4, there were no items moved. Oh, sorry.
Consent.
Item 3 is the consent.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Kavanagh.
with the previously notated change, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented for the mayor to sign, the clerk to attest.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Mr. Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer? Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
All ayes. No items were moved from the agenda, so we will move to item 5, department reports. We'll start with our community development block grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So I'm here today to provide the annual report for the Community Development Block Grant Program. Just as a reminder, this program is guided by a 5-year plan called the Consolidated Plan. We go out to the community and we survey the community, see what the needs are, work with different stakeholders to identify the goals for the program. Each year we complete an action plan so that we can figure out the strategies that we'll use to move towards those goals each year. And at the end of the year, then we complete the caper to give everybody an update on what's going on. The PY18 ran from October 1st, 2018 to September 30th, 2019. So what exactly is a caper? It is, if I can get the button, hold on. Okay, so a caper is an acronym for the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. This is basically just a way for us to look at the annual accomplishments and evaluate how the progress that we're making towards the consolidated plan goals. It's also a way to be transparent to the public for how the program's being run. One of the biggest things are the goals and outcomes of the program. Everybody wants to know what we're actually doing with the funds. So each of the goals, we identify activities to meet those goals. The first goal that we addressed was improving accessibility. These were all construction projects. They take a little bit longer. So these were all in progress at the end of the program year. So the top one is the sidewalk project that MDC is working on in the Carlton Avenue area. We also had the Public Works modernization of the streetlights in 2 separate LMI neighborhoods. And the Meridian Library District began upgrades on ADA compliant restrooms. To enhance homeownership opportunities, we provided assistance to 4 families. They were able to purchase homes in Meridian using our program, and those were administered by the Ada County Housing Authority as well as NeighborWorks Boise. For the goal of providing social services, we worked with the Meridian Boys and Girls Club, and they provided extended care scholarships for 40 children. And Jesse Tree prevented homelessness for 35 families. Our final goal that we addressed this year was admin and fair housing. We've met all of the deadlines for timeliness reporting and applications. There's been a lot of training this year. I've been able to identify some areas for process improvements of monitoring, application, budgeting, things like that. Working with the other entitlement agencies to do an analysis of impediments for the whole Treasure Valley so that we're not so siloed and we can kind of work together a little bit better. And we also, the 4 entitlement communities, did a fair housing radio campaign in April. So the other area of people's concern is, of course, the funding. So for funding this year, we started out with $708,000, and that was $422,000 for the current year, and then there was a rollover of about $280,000. So of that, we spent $342,000, $19,000 on administration fair housing activities for housing the homebuyer assistance program. We spent $40,000, and on public facilities and infrastructure, we spent around $238,000. That was for the Carlton sidewalks, the Crestwood Fenway Streetlights project, and there was also an invoice. The whole project for the Meridian Elementary Picnic Shelter was completed last year, but we just had one invoice that we had to pay this year. And then we also had public services for $38,000 for the Boys and Girls Club and Jessie Tree. With us working with low to moderate income households, then one of the biggest things is housing affordability. So we've really tried to look at ways that we can be involved in that to make it a little bit better in Meridian. Some of the efforts that we've done so far is childcare through the Boys and Girls Club to make sure that parents can go to work and they don't have to pay the extra cost for childcare fees for those households that qualify, and they can put more money towards their housing expenses. We also have the Home Buyers Assistance Program that I discussed, and we are currently discussing a homeowner rehab program so that people who are in housing that they can currently afford can stay there. And we're working on a proposal to develop a work group that can address the bigger issue of housing affordability so that we can do bigger things and have a more citywide approach. As far as our homebuyer assistance program, since 2009, we've been able to help 38 households, and of those, 84% are currently maintaining so 84% are maintaining ownership, but we only look at up to 5 years because that's kind of what HUD does with their other housing programs. It's not a requirement for this one, but we just kind of had it as a threshold to see where people were at. So of the people who purchased homes before 2016, or 2015, then 75% maintain home ownership for at least 5 years. We also, as far as I'm aware, the best to my knowledge, there was a 0% default rate on all of those loans, which is really good considering the fact that the national FHA serious delinquency rate is 3.7% nationally. So it's really important to stay involved in the community, to know what's going on from year to year. So some of the collaborative efforts that we've been doing this year, we've been working with Our Path Home, the Behavioral Health Board, Meridian Anti-Drug Coalition, Housing and Homelessness Roundtable, Neighbors United, and we've been working on a diversity work group. So that is the extent of it. Here's kind of the timeline of what's happening right now. The CAPER is open for public comment from November 22nd to December 10th. There will be a public hearing on December 10th, and then I will put in any comments I receive and give you guys a final version and a resolution for you to approve on December 17th. And as soon as I get that back, I'll submit it to HUD. So no later than the 20th, it'll be submitted to HUD. So here is my contact information. The CAPER is available on the website, which is the bottom link down there. And people can submit comments to me by phone, email. I'm down the hall in community development, so however. Does anybody have any questions?
Council, Mr. Kemner.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Chris, just curious, those 4 homes that we helped with home buyers assistance, do we know the range of what those homes are selling for? And does any of our partner organizations place limitations on what a house can cost for us to provide assistance?
That's a great question. There are some, this year, one of the process improvements that we made is that we asked ACHA to make sure that it fits into the affordable housing criteria. It's section 215 under HUD. And so they are required to make sure that they can afford the home before they actually get into it. So there are some restrictions around that, but I can't remember them all off the top of my head right now.
Madam Mayor. And Crystal, don't expect you to be the subject matter expert, so if you don't know, it's okay. Does Ada County Housing Authority then place a ceiling on what a home can cost based on the market?
I don't believe that they do. I don't believe that they do. They have been running into issues. They ended up turning back some money again this year because they're having a hard time finding homes that do fall into the criteria where people can afford them. And people are also coming in and making cash offers and buying them just outright over the top of people who are in line for it. So, yeah, it's been a struggle.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Appreciate your report. Nicely done.
Very nicely done. Any other questions from council? Okay. Thank you, Crystal. Okay, item 5B is under our IT department. As I gave you a heads up, we will start coming in front of council department by department to talk about their key performance indicators related to dashboards. So quarterly, you've been receiving dashboards. They would like to come and give you an overview of why they think it's important that you get the dashboards that they share and seek your input on any additional measurements or how they're moving the needle type of illustrations. This will also be used, this feedback, as we move to phase 2 of our accountability website in OpenGov in phase 2. So phase 2 of OpenGov will start sharing dashboards. So our citizens are seeing the same thing you are, and you have instant access to those. So just want to kind of set the parameters as we start these discussions. Thank you, Dave, for being the guinea pig and kicking us off.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for that introduction. So to start things off, we'll just jump right into IT's key performance indicators. The first thing that we're going to give you here is phone calls. These, again, are in the quarterly reports that you get from the mayor's office. You'll see here that we track phone calls. This is across the board, across our department, for all our interactions with customers. This helps us get an idea of what our workload looks like from that standpoint, and kind of gives you an idea of what one of the various things that we're doing. So, next item that we have here is tickets or requests. So everything that comes into the IT department, whether it's for a new project for software development or whether it's, hey, my mouse is not working, turns into a ticket or a request for us. So we track these, we are able to report off of them, and you can see here quarterly about how many we do. This is a really good gauge for us on what our workload looks like, areas where we can improve, areas where customers are having problems. We also use this information for projects and what the timelines look like. So anyway, super helpful stat, and we actually track this one in much more detail on the operational side. So the next one we have is just an employees supported. As you can imagine, being a support or administrative department, we support our employees. So as employee growth continues, so do the number of requests that we get for supporting those employees. So helpful for us to know, hey, look, do we need to adjust resources or figure out if we have additional needs based off of new folks coming in. Typically, we don't do that proactively. It's a reactionary thing. So, hey, we've had all these things happen, and we need to come back and ask for more staff to continue to handle technical support. But it's one of the stats that we use. The next one is devices supported. This is just client devices, so computers that end users touch or employees touch, not everything else that we touch on the back end, just because that would be about quadruple this number. Just not worth showing. Anyways, but as this number continues to grow, it also is reflective again of our staffing levels and needs. It's also something that we tie into the budget, so you'll see on the next slide a lot more detail. We show you additions to these two things, so both devices and employees. Devices, because first of all, hey, look, that's important to us because we're supporting more technology. It's impactful to our staffing, and it shows overall the city continues to grow, obviously, but it also shows the budget. So we have numbers in here that we report on a quarterly basis showing, hey, look, this was the cost of these new assets that we acquired, and that's more of a heads up for you to know that's going to come up again. When we buy a piece of technology, it's not a one-time purchase. It's not, hey, look, get it and forget it. It comes back again because those items need to be refreshed on a regular basis. Typically for these devices, you're gonna see a 5-year replacement cycle per our computer replacement policy. So just again, more of a heads up. And then same goes for positions. As we continue to add new positions, we continue to grow, and again, that's useful for budgeting purposes. So the last thing, which is a recent addition that we've been tracking for a number of years, but it's recently been added to the quarterly dashboard, is our customer satisfaction rating, which we're pretty proud of. You can see here we have a 99 to 100% satisfaction rating, and that has been over the last 3 years. We also track how many people or how many of the requests that we actually send a survey out for actually responds, and that's lower than I'd like to see. It's at 15%, so 10 employees get something resolved, and 1 out of 1.5 of those actually give us a response and say, yep, thanks. Which, you know, it is what it is. We get feedback in multiple avenues. It's not just over this survey. So we hear a lot of positive all the time, but we would definitely like to get that number up a little bit higher to be a little bit more reflective statistic of the overall how we're doing. So again, very happy with those numbers. And overall, I think if you talk to our customers, you'll find that they're pretty pleased with the service that we provide. So that makes us happy. That's what we're here for. That is it. That's what we have on our quarterly dashboard this time. So I guess with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Council, any feedback?
Madam Mayor.
Yes. Ms. Milo.
Dave, I appreciate the report. I'm glad you added the last section on the customer satisfaction. I think that's important. Would like to see a higher number. But if you go back a few slides, it was like you had a jump in employees, like one quarter, like jumped way up and then jumped way down.
It did. I can explain
Was that?
So what happened here is for many years, we had tracked
He
contractors.
told some they were on their own.
Yeah, we were like, hey, sorry.
We're not helping you this
Yeah,
time.
we're
sorry.
not helping you. You know, you drew the wrong number. Sorry. No, we were tracking contractors as part of that number because we do provide support to many city contractors as well, and that also impacts our workload. But what we found is with many temporary or contracted employees, it's a little harder to keep track of when they start and stop. And so our numbers were skewed pretty bad because of that. So we took them out of that mix. And that's why you see the number jump from almost just over 550 down to just over 500 that one quarter. And I believe when we sent that out back in 2018 that we actually said, hey, look, this is the reason for it. But it's been a while. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Mr. Kavner?
Madam Mayor, just a comment. Dave, again, I think you hear this every time you're up. We appreciate so much IT department. It's such a linchpin for all the other departments, and the service you provide to your internal customers so they can go do great things for our citizens is really great. The other piece that I want to continue to commend you is that you've really created a culture of solution-oriented responses. One of our staff or employees has a concern or needs a solution. Sometimes it's off the shelf. Sometimes you guys spend considerable time to develop something that is even more remarkable in-house. Always being mindful for our taxpayers and making sure that the investment is right at the right time. And I just think that's a culture you don't find in government very often. And I just think that's something you guys need to be commended for doing that and reinforcing that culture year over year.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Kavner. I appreciate that.
Well, and I think sometimes you don't see it because they haven't earned the trust and respect. And our IT department has, which allows a lot more of that to happen.
That it does.
Thank you, Dave.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, Mr. Borden.
Just a couple of quick questions. On those early slides, what's the difference between someone who calls you and a ticket? You get that many calls that don't generate tickets?
We do, and that's because it's follow-up on a project that we're working on or going back and forth with a customer about an issue or whatever. So the ticket count is obviously a lot less than the phone call count because of that.
Or IT just tells you to turn off your computer and turn it back on again.
And then they call again and say, hey, it's still not fixed. And we're like, well, did you try dancing around in a circle? That could help.
And the satisfaction survey comes from those who have a ticket?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And again, that's optional. People do not have, they're not required to respond to that. But
Madam Mayor, one last, maybe a suggestion to chew on to Luke's comment is, we've talked about articulating the value of a lot of the in-house development work that you do and the savings that we capture because we're not outsourcing it, buying something off a shelf. So that would be a nice figure to know down the road at some point.
would be, yeah.
There's-
We're going to try to report that on at least an annual basis.
Yeah.
I believe we included, during our budget discussion, I believe we included some of that information in our budget request just for a position, just because we figured, hey, look, it aligns with what we're looking for, and here's some of the value that provides. But because software projects can tend to go anywhere from 3 months to 18 months, it's not something that we feel super useful to report on a quarterly basis.
Makes sense.
So,
Madam
Well,
Mayor.
and I think one thing that Dave didn't mention is they went on, look at corporations and what they're sharing with their boards to see what matters, and that's where they came up with a number of these, feeling that this would be of interest. Mr. Kevner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to remind council too, and we talked a lot about this at the budget, so much of where we're going towards is software as a service, so it's subscription models. And so we often can capture maybe in a year an estimate of what you saved, but that gets compounded year over year over year in really long-term savings. And Dave, to kind of dovetail on that, I appreciate that you really evaluate when it makes sense to use an off-the-shelf tool and when it makes sense to have you guys develop things in-house. Again, that collaborative process with department directors, with the internal customers, is really finding solutions that meet the needs of the departments. I just think that's a really cool, really appropriate business model that your department should be proud of, that the city should be proud of. It's something I love when I go visit other city leaders, talk about this team that you guys have and the amazing accomplishments that you bring on an annual basis. So
thank you.
Lots of
It's something that
savings.
we take great pride in, and it's really cool to be able to say, hey, look, we developed this product. It works for our customers 100%. It makes their jobs easier, and it was at the fraction of the cost of what we would have done if we had bought it off the shelf. So that's pretty satisfying.
Yep.
So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
thanks, Dave. Happy Thanksgiving.
Item 5C is under the mayor's office.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So I'm here to talk about the mayor's office KPIs, and I think our KPIs are a little different than what you'll see from most departments, because these are really based upon overall city goals and objectives that we work on in the mayor's office. So with that, the 5 categories that we are looking at measuring are related to events, public engagement communications, strategic planning, continuous improvement and innovation, and programming. And this really covers the mayor's office and other government, the employees that we have in our office and other government and the things that they work on. So with that, I'll just go right into it. And what these are all pulled, these 5 areas are really areas of our strategic plan that we focus on in terms of the strategic objectives which are assigned to the mayor's office or other government, which is where the KPIs are derived from. And we probably realize is that you've never seen a mayor's office KPI on the dashboard. And even with what I'm going to go over, I don't know how much sense it will make to do that under the data we currently have and use, but I think the question mark would be, is this adequate, and where do we go from here, or do we look at different data in order to provide that long term? So the first one is related to events. So this is pulled from the city's strategic plan. We have an outcome-based model for all of these KPIs that we're looking at. And so if you look at the city strategic plan, we talk about our city-sponsored events. And from the last city survey we did, we had a rating of 67% for our events satisfaction from the residents. So what we did when we did the strategic plan is we reset that. Our goal was to be 75% at the 2020 survey. So that survey will be done this next summer. It's in the budget. It will be part of that. And that's what you're going to see from all of these KPIs is we had a level that was a benchmark from the last survey. We set a goal for this next survey. So that's what we're working towards, to see the outcomes of the things that we have done and implemented over the last 3 years, citywide and in the mayor's office, and if it moved the benchmark. What you'll also see on here is some indicators that we can utilize moving forward. So we know, especially if we're going to continue to do a city survey every 3 years, maybe we go to every 2 years, but even that time frame between that can be difficult. So what else might we be able to look at in the meantime to set benchmarks on other indicators to maybe tell us how we think we're doing in those teams before we go out every 2 or 3 years for the city survey. So whether that's looking at next door polling, asking the residents, if you went to this event, what did you think? And getting that feedback from them. Social media, putting that stuff out and asking the community, what did you think of this event? What was your overall satisfaction? And if we are not seeing that we're even tracking at what our goal is, what we'd like to see in the city survey, then we can ask ourselves why. So the next one was on public engagement. And this is one of the ones that I worked heavily on over the last several years. And our goal is to increase satisfaction of public engagement from 61 to 65%.
Robert, your slide changed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. So again, this was the public engagement. How do we involve our citizens to help them feel empowered with our goal? Indicators on this could be next door, looking at how many people are looking at videos that we do of our events, the after the fact. On the personal level, and I'm just one person, I don't put the value on how many people show up at each event necessarily. Because typically when people are happy, they don't come out. When they're not happy, that's when you typically will see more people show up to give their viewpoint. And as I've told the mayor for years, if you want 100 people in the event, I'll get you 100 people at the event. You're just not gonna like the conversation that occurs at that event, and that may not be what you wanna talk about. So for me, it is looking at the back end of what does that public engagement look like? Did they feel like they were valued? Did they feel like they were heard? So that's the outcome that we will have, is trying to go towards that 65%. So in communications, this too, in the last citizen survey was at 69% with a goal of reaching towards 75% towards our satisfaction. And our indicators that we are looking at, and some of these still have to be evaluated further, but looking at when we do pay for a post, what's our ROI on that? Do we feel like we got a better value from that, either in terms of people showing up, people being involved or engaged in that? What are our top posts on? And I was talking to Shandy, and yes, we were joking. If we put a cute cat in every video, our numbers would go through the roof.
Boomerang.
Yes, boomerang cats, and there you go. But what are the topics that people feel most engaged about? And what we've heard so far is recycling. Recycling and trash is one of the biggest posts that we have on those topics. So does that mean we only stay focused on that? No, but at least gives us an idea about where the conversation is occurring and what might drive people to future conversations so that they feel part of that comment. Of course, we can look at our interaction on Nextdoor, how many people participate in our posts or our polling to feel like, are they also being heard, and look from that standpoint. So strategic planning, this is obviously been, so you've heard about this one before. You get regular updates. This is one that does show up in your packets about where we are in terms of percentage of strategic objectives or tactics completed from that standpoint. So we'll continue to provide that information. Continuous improvement and innovation. So this one is, Vince, was trying to figure out how do you show the value and get feedback from residents in terms of the 90,000 foot level. And, looking at if we can improve our overall satisfaction of services, perhaps that has a direct correlation to improvements that we make in that process. Whether process improvements, just overall program improvements. So we are looking at raising that from 76 to 84% as our end goal for continuous improvement. And you can see some of the indicators that we would look at in terms of numbers of processes. This is just an example, but we may want to look at not just numbers of processes, but number of programs that actually had process improvements, or look at the ones that have the direct, that touch the most people and what processes were improved in those areas, whether it's patrol, police patrol, or fire education programs, those along those lines. But that's the from that perspective. And then programming. This is an area where we have not yet set KPIs. But we're starting to look at that, and I think that having Dave Miles on board will really help us look at our programming and what do KPIs look like in our programming area. Some of the things that we've talked about are looking at survey programming, but MIAC is a great example. Year over year, return participants in MIAC. How do we gauge the value of someone that comes in as a freshman and they continue through 4 years? That will help maybe give us an indication about the value of that to the people who are doing it, or something else. How many people from MIAC end up becoming a youth on commissioner, from that standpoint. So we are going to look at what type of KPIs can show that what we're trying to do in terms of providing leadership in MIAC, how that translates or correlates throughout that process. So we will be working more on our programming elements, KPIs. And as I noted, I'm going to end here just with a basic comment. We are doing a new city survey during this next year where we will update these. We will also be working on a new strategic plan during this next year, which will help set new overall goals, objectives, strategic elements, and probably KPIs for the mayor's office if we stay at this 90,000-foot level. I think when we do that so that we can remain relevant and not create stagnant information, we'll want to set up whatever goals, the objectives that can be ongoing and measured. And it may be as simple as doing a quarterly next door poll on things, and that may be what sets our goal, or it could be something else. So while this is our first attempt from the mayor's office, at least want to put some stuff out there for you guys to look at. And I would love to get any feedback of things that you think you would like to see or things missing, whether that's today or as we move forward. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Council, any questions?
Madam
Mr.
Mayor?
Burt.
No questions, more of a comment. Well done, Robert, Mayor-elect Simpson. I honestly think, I was pretty surprised with those numbers with public engagement and communicate. I thought they would have been higher, because I think you guys do a phenomenal job with how you communicate with the community. In fact, I think you guys do such an effective job with communicating with our residents that it almost, I almost think that going forward, at least with me, that would be something that I look at more as opposed to like creating more ordinances that just, that can bog down our system, to be honest with you. I think you guys, time after time, whether it's the recycling situation or anything else, you guys have really hit the nail on the head with reaching out to as many people as possible, and good job for that.
Madam Mayor, Councilman Burnt, if I could just so you're aware, you probably haven't seen the 2017 survey results in comparison to other communities. We are off the chart in our numbers. Most communities are in the 30s for services all the way across the board. So the fact that we are up in the 80s and 90s in some individual departments with what they get, and as well as these other things, we are already at a really high level in comparison to other communities. And I moved the bar on these 6 to 7 percentage points, hoping that what we would do would see that type of increase. But it's phenomenal, the survey results that we get when you compare them to other communities in Idaho and throughout the Northwest.
Madam Mayor, follow up. That doesn't surprise me. Honestly, it's really amazing what the mayor's office and your team has done to really hone in on that. You guys have done a great job. My neighbors have talked to me about it.
Thank you.
Great job.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Kavner.
this is maybe more of a 90,000-foot view question for either you, Robert, or you, Madam Mayor. This data that you share with us is beneficial. It's good for us to know. I assume it's being brought before council because you're looking for some feedback. And so as we do these over the next set of weeks, what is that feedback that you're looking to gain from City Council?
We're looking for feedback in terms of those quarterly reports on information that is helpful for you as you're out in the community and you're getting questions. There are elements of what citizens would want to know that you then have the answers to. These are not all the operational KPIs, But these are the outward facing, and that shows that we are working in those focus areas as part of our strategic plan. And these are probably more frequently asked questions that you get from citizens. And since we don't know what all the questions you are asked, most of them have shown up on the quarterly report, but some of them might be new, some of them might be modified, saying, here's what we believe you'd like to know, but you tell us, is this too much information? Is it not enough? If it's not enough, what do you want to be able to answer? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5D. Does D go before D1, I assume? I just wanted to verify that. D, Public Works, our budget amendment, and we have Warren here to talk with us about that.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we have a budget amendment for you to consider tonight. If I can get all these things organized here. This first budget amendment is for well 17. As you all know, iron and manganese in our water system has been a matter of concern for a while now. It causes some taste and odor and also discoloration of the water. We have been doing a lot of work over the past few years to address that. We have put in several treatment facilities and have a flushing program that has greatly mitigated these issues throughout the city, and the complaints and so forth for that have continued to drop. However, recently, let me start out by saying that manganese itself, that's the thing we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, is not a regulated contaminant. It's a secondary contaminant by the EPA. There's not a threshold or a limit that's set for that. But recently, the Idaho Department of DEQ has issued a health advisory for manganese. And it basically has suggested that there might be some issues for infants under the age of 6 months if they have too much manganese in the formula or whatever they drink. So we have just recently done a series of tests on all of our wells to determine what constituents we have and at what levels they are. And one of our wells, well 17, has manganese levels that are approaching the limits that they suggest are unhealthy for these infants. It doesn't exceed that threshold, but it is close. We had already planned in 2022, I believe, to put a treatment facility on well 17. So what this budget amendment does is it moves that up. We're essentially suggesting that we move up that treatment facility from 2022 to this year, start that process this year to design and construct a treatment facility at well 17 so that we don't run the risk of having a well that exceeds that threshold. This, this is going to be offset by the fact that we had last year completed a test well for well 33, which was going to be a new well for the city. And in doing those test wells, we did a lot of sampling of the various water quality at the different aquifers and found that there really wasn't a good source of water at that location. So we didn't feel it was prudent to move ahead and build the production well and the pumping facilities at this time for well 33. And also by moving 17 up, this allows us to delay or postpone some work on a different treatment facility that we were going to do at well 23. So you should see in the memo that you have that the costs are pretty well offsetting in the long-term plan, but really this budget amendment is about approving the money that we need to start the design and construction for a iron and manganese filter at well 17. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Warren. Questions from council? Mr. Burnt?
Just one question. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So to start out the construction and the design review for this project, what's the ultimate cost going to be? Or is there $700,000 the total amount?
Well, I think the enhancement for this particular one is, if I remember right, is 900,000.
Oh, 900,000.
That's first year, that's 2020. So what that'll get us is the design and the purchase of the equipment. We actually have to procure, go out with an RFP and procure the filtration package itself. And then once that filtration package has been selected, then they build the building and all the other facilities around that particular treatment package. So this year will be the design work and the pilot testing and the procurement of the actual treatment package. And then next year, they will build the building and finish up the project.
This is a 2-year project, and just getting the equipment itself is around 9 months, and so you need to order it well in advance.
That's correct.
Well in advance. Any other questions? Okay, we'll ask for action on the budget amendment, and if you want any further discussion on the task order. Ms. Lowe Roberts.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the budget amendment for $900,000 for well 17 treatment. Can I go ahead and include the design for $283,786? Not to exceed that amount.
If we can have 2 separate motions, that would be awesome.
Okay, so I will amend that to move that we approve the $900,000 for well 17 treatment.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve item 5D. Any discussion? Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh? Councilmember Borton?
Aye.
All ayes. Item D1 is regarding the task order. Is there any additional information on that? Ms. Lowe Roberts.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the design to Mountain Works for not to exceed, for well 17 for not exceed $283,786.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 5D1. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Included, right?
Councilmember Borton?
Aye.
All ayes. Thank you, Warren. And I assume that you are item 5E as well in talking streetlights.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Again, this is a budget amendment to add the street lighting to the Chinden Boulevard improvements that the Costco facility or the Costco construction is going to facilitate. As you may recall, we've had some discussion about this. They were originally included, then they were removed, and if we wanted them back in, this was something that the city was going to have to pay for. We have got the change order cost or the cost to add that back into the project. It was a little higher than we had anticipated or had hoped, to be honest with you, but we did take a look at this and tried to do some assessment to determine whether or not if we went out and bid this on our own separately after the project was complete and put these lights in later, whether we'd save any money. And honestly, there are efficiencies with putting it in with the project. And the bidding environment right now is not that great, to be honest with you, just from the standpoint there is a lot of work and we're having a hard time getting good bids on some of our other projects. So we don't necessarily believe that we're going to get a better price. So our recommendation is to go ahead and move forward with the price that we've been given, move forward with this budget amendment and include the lights in the work with the rest of the project and just get it done, and it'll be done. The lights will be in when the rest of the facility is completed. And with that, I will stand for any questions. The next item, maybe I can address that now, is just the amendment of the agreement that we had originally signed with them, the amendment to this agreement to include the streetlights in the project. And I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Warren. Council, any questions?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kevner.
Warren, you'll have to forgive me. I know this has kind of been a bouncing ball, and you and your team have been working diligently on this. So at the end of the day, You know, the agreement was for either Costco or the state to pay for the lights. Inevitably, the city's got to pay for the infrastructure. Is that accurate?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Councilman Cavanagh, the state did agree to pay for the conduit and the junction boxes. But the wiring and the poles and the lights themselves, they were not willing to pay for under the STARS agreement. And so if we wanted them in, it was going to be the city's responsibility to include them in the project.
Madam Mayor, follow up? But Warren, our agreement was with Costco, not with the state.
That is correct.
Okay.
Costco's doing the work.
Madam Mayor, but City of Meridian's still paying them for the lights. And I guess, Madam Mayor, this kind of leads to my question. Where are the dollars for the lights coming from? Is that an enterprise expense or is that a general fund expense?
So, Madam Mayor, members of the council, that will be a general fund expense. There's a certain percentage of that, I think about $88,000, that we have collected from developments that have taken place on Chinden Boulevard that haven't installed the lights but have put money up for the lights. So there's about $88,000 in funding that's included in this, overall this $400,023. So the actual money that will be coming from the general fund, new money that will be coming from the general fund will be that less the $88,000. But the 300 and some odd $1,000 is going to come out of the general fund. And that's what we had talked about previously.
Madam Mayor?
Ms. Earl Roberts.
Madam Mayor, if I may. Warren, I think, didn't the confusion that Councilman Cavanagh is referring to come something to do with the state saying what was deemed as not necessary regarding safety and that the lighting wasn't necessary, but we determined that it was?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, there was, our policy, city policy, would require that this roadway be lit. ITD policy requires that the intersections be lit. They don't
consider it to be.
There's a lot of gray area there, and their interpretation of their rules and the regulations was that this would not be required. And we said, well, it's required for us. And Costco, we are requiring Costco to put the lights along their frontage because that's in our DA, that they have to do that. And they're going to do that at their expense. But the rest of the lights that are along the improvement, this project was assigned by ITD to Costco to be constructed. ITD was originally going to do the project. But they weren't going to do it as fast as Costco wanted. So they assigned it to Costco and said, you guys can build it for us. And that's why we have the agreement with Costco instead of with ITD.
Madam Mayor.
Ms.
Wow,
Marlin.
I scared myself. Warren, isn't there also, though, future development that will reimburse some of these funds further down?
Yes, we've already collected around 80,000.
88
88.
already, but for future development. in this-
Madam Mayor,
Or is that-
Councilmember Mylum. Yes, that's correct. So for undeveloped parcels along this corridor, this 2-mile corridor, when they come in, we will assess them, similar to what we did, those that have already developed. Whatever the cost per light is that we're going to pay for here, we will assess them to reimburse us for those along their frontage.
And that'll go back to the general fund.
Correct.
Madam Mayor, so just a clarifying question. So up until now, they've been it's been going into the enterprise fund?
No.
Oh, it is from the general fund, the 88,000 that we have? Okay, it just seemed a little commingled there for a second. My misunderstanding.
Didn't mean to insinuate that. It's in its own, there's an account for that funding.
Madam Mayor, yes, one last. So based on the number of lights and the future development, how much of this will be reimbursed? Will it all be covered at the end of the day?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it could be, but that depends on, obviously some of these parcels, I don't know whether they'll all develop, whether some of them will stay undeveloped and how long that'll occur. So I think it's theoretically possible that they would all be reimbursed at some point.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Burnt.
I mean, I think we're sort of in a position we have to do this. I'll be voting yes, plugging my nose at the same time. I don't think it's right that the state put us in this position at the last minute. I think it was the 11th hour. They let us know that, they wouldn't be reimbursing Costco for this, and that's where this whole confusion stemmed from. So another example of our great state leaders putting the burden back in our laps. So thank you so very much.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Palmer.
I think when it comes to all the money that the city does spend, from shade structures to clown camp, there is an appropriate government expense, and I think that the amazing work that we do with the street lighting program is definitely a worthwhile investment for our citizens. So I'll be voting for it happily, smelling every bit of it along the way without holding my nose. In fact, with that, I'd like to make the motion. I move that we approve the budget amendment in the amount of $423,375 for the streetlight installation along Chinden.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor, I think that's what we call putting lipstick on a pig.
No, public safety and the lighting standards is a big responsibility. Yes, the road building authority did not fund it. It is our mandate, it's our role,
Agreed.
and so we need to ensure it's there.
I agree.
Any further discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
Thanks, Warren. I feel kind of like got put in front of the firing line a little bit tonight, and I think my frustration is not with you and not with the state or with Costco. I mean, we all take ownership in that. I feel like we as a city made a commitment to our citizens that the infrastructure needed for the Costco development to go in was going to be paid by the growth and the development. I think that your answers are sufficient to lead me to believe that future development will reimburse the taxpayers. So I'm supportive as well. Appreciate you kind of helping us get all up to speed on this tonight.
You know, I will just preface it as future development might. This is not for granted. And I'll tell you what, the developments that are going along that corridor are not creating the trips. And those trips are traveling through our city. We want them to travel through our city safely. And so it is a responsibility of all. If you don't close the gap on that, because there's a lot of development that is already there, you have collected, but we didn't collect to the amount that this is anticipated per light. So it is something that I think Mr. Palmer communicated. This is a critical role for the city, and if we're not fully reimbursed for those costs, it is a cost of what we need to provide in providing public safety.
Great.
There's nothing further. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Milo?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye.
Thank you, and thank you for you and your team. This has been one of those long, drawn-out conversations, and you put a lot of work into it. Police department stepped up as well and giving us an idea of crash rates out in that area and why these continue to be so important. So thank you for what you've done and continue to do to make sure that corridor is a safe corridor.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, so that was on the budget amendment. The next item, item 5F, is regarding the second amendment, and that is the agreement with Costco. I don't think we need any further.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Palmer.
I move that we approve item 5F, the second addendum to the city utilities reimbursement agreement between the city and Costco.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Milo?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt? Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts? Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye.
All ayes. Item 5G is under our Community Development Department. Shared vehicles. Kayla, favorite topic.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, shared vehicles, AKA e-scooters. So 3 weeks ago, I was here kind of getting some direction from the council, reporting some numbers from Bird, who is our current service provider for shared vehicles. I got a little bit of direction from the council, really had two things on my to-do list. One was to contact Bird, again, who currently has the agreement with the city to provide our shared vehicle service, and understand from them some of the efforts that they're making or have been trying to make to deploy scooters that are consistent with the contract. And then two, got some direction to move forward with a RFP for 2020. So I'm here to report back on those two items. So I did talk to Arthur with Bird Rides. That current agreement ends the end of this year, by the way, 12/31/19, in case that wasn't clear. And just kind of asked him again, what's going on? You're deploying roughly half of what we kind of anticipated you would put out as the minimum. Do we need to amend the contract? Maybe I'll start there since I mentioned it. Their interpretation of the contract, and if you read it, it says at initial deployment, they will have 100, not ongoing, they'll have 100 every day. So as we get into the draft RFP and draft contract that you have in your packet, we've cleared that up to clarify that that's an ongoing daily expectation for this, not just on day one you have that certain amount. So I do not have before you today an amendment to the contract because they don't believe they're in violation. And again, at this point, with 5 weeks left in the year, it's not worth arguing about, in my opinion. So we're letting that go. But really, he said the main reason, some of the effort that haven't been making is largely because of the village. He said without the village, the program in Meridian really isn't very viable. That's the destination, if you will, in Meridian. So they're not seeing the ridership they would have hoped for because they haven't been able to negotiate something to allow e-scooters on the premise at the village. So that was a lot of our conversation. He said that coupled with the fee structure, and he didn't say it was crazy, but he's like, without the village, we aren't going to pay $25,000 next year because of the ridership numbers you're seeing. So something's got to give there, right? You either lessen your fee, or you get the village if you really want us to be interested in that. He didn't say they wouldn't respond to a proposal, but they're on the fence on if they do, kind of depending. So that's kind of the update I have for you with our current contractor regarding that. And then the second part of that, again, was to get ready to proceed with letting the RFP for the next contract year. So Keith Watts, thanks to Keith, he's been played a large role in kind of updating this for what you have in your packet tonight, and Emily Kane in legal as well. So what you see in the packet, and I'm going to run through that with you here real quickly. I don't think it'll take a ton of time, but the sample contract, so it's really kind of two pieces. It's the RFP, and then attached to that is a sample contract. That sample contract is largely what we use now, but it is sample, right? We've got to negotiate with whoever responds, and there could be some tweaks, so I don't want this to be taken as this is the contract, because there could be some negotiation back and forth. So I think with that, I'm going to just jump in and kind of just go in order of the pages. So I'm going to start on page 3 of the draft RFP. That's kind of the first thing to call out is it's clear now that this is a non-exclusive franchise agreement. The real question for you or touch point for you is up to 2. We talked about that. You could potentially get 3 or 4 or more. 2 seems to be, at least for the next year, and we'll talk about even the term here in a second, manageable and appropriate. And it says up to 2 non-exclusive franchise agreements. So that's the first kind of, again, touch point. If we want to change that, if we don't want to put a cap on it, if we're not interested in just having 1 and we say 2 or more, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways you could word this, but that's how it's currently is, may offer up to 2 non-exclusive franchise agreements. And we can come back to that too if you want to read and have more thoughts. The other thing also on page 3 that I would just call to your attention is that non-refundable franchise fee that's due annually. It's $25,000 currently. We've prorated that, and I'll talk about kind of the timing of this program here in another couple of pages. But we anticipate, again, assuming a thumbs up tonight to move forward with the timeline that we've got in here by March 1st, having the contract and them able to deploy by March 1 of 2020. So that $25,000 has been prorated for year one in the contract. And that then ties into, this is a newer thought, but having a 3-year term. So that is on page, so it's on page 3, but it's also on page 17 and a little more in definition. So page 17 of the, that covers the franchise fee. And let's see, how does it read? That's due on the first of every month, so that's in C on page 17. And then the term is page 15. So again, right now it's in the draft would be, the sample agreement would be, expires on 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, 2022. So a 3-year term. So I don't know if there's any comments on that. Keith may be a better one to kind of walk you through that. That was something that he recommended we do with each of the vendors, again, up to 2, rather than doing an RFP every year. It could be renewable for that 3-year term.
Keith, did you have a comment?
One of the things, when Caleb was going through trying to point these things out, just to clarify a little bit, in the RFP, we have 2 sections, like you said. We have the RFP, which is instructing people how to propose, but all the terms and conditions of the resulting contract will be in that agreement. So all of our terms and conditions are in the second phase in the contract. So the fee structure, when they make their payments, the term, all of that will be in the contract itself, in the sample contract.
Yeah, so, Madam Mayor, just to say that another way, we've combined those things, right? So page 13, 1 to 13 is sort of the RFP and the questionnaire and all that. And then page 14 through 30 would be an example of what that contract should look like. It'll roughly be those terms. So then just to keep going then on page 10, and again, this would be in the RFP section then, is that proposed schedule. So again, assuming there's no major changes to what, kind of where this is headed, we're looking at mid-December, December 13th to issue the RFP. January 10th would be the deadline for submission. January 24th, we would have a selection panel that would review, score, and select up to 2 vendors. Just a couple of business days later, we would notify those respondents of how they did there. And then February 10th, begin negotiations with hoping to wrap that up by February 18th again. And that gives us a couple of weeks for them to prepare to deploy, and again, deploy on or by the 1st of March. So that's kind of the schedule that we've drafted. Gives the RFP on the street for enough time to score, to negotiate, to launch. I think the next thing I have highlighted is on page 13. So again, we're not in the contract part of this or the agreement part of this, but it would potentially end up as a term in the contract. And this has to do with an age limitation. I will just let you know, as one of the scoring committee members last year, this was a big deal for those that were there. Not necessarily city staff, but for the downtown reps, the entertainment folks that were there, the youth commissioner that was there, having the ability to verify users was big technology. Like, I don't remember how everybody scored it, but that was one of the key things in the responses was, do you have the tech that you can verify that the user is of age or licensed or whatever? So I guess my question, or our question to you is, should we disclose that early on in this? Don't waste your time if you can't, because it's going to be such a key component to this. Or is it just another factor that factors in this new scoring committee? They can decide how important of a factor that is. I don't want it to get so far along that I'll just a quick aside. I think some of the reason that I mentioned a few weeks ago, we haven't had a whole lot of complaints, 15 or so in the entire life of the program, is, I believe, a lot of it, that there is a restriction on minors or unlicensed riders. I haven't gotten any complaints that, that there's a 9-year-old riding this thing and buzzing me in a, park or whatever. So not to say that we have to do that again, but that may be where you could attribute some of the, again, I'm not going to call this a successful program, but limiting some of the complaints is that you do have to be a licensed driver by bird. So we could potentially make that part of the eligibility questionnaire and put in there, can you restrict riders to being licensed, 16, 18, whatever we want that to be. Is there want to do that in the questionnaire in the RFP section, not just in the scoring section of that?
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Mylum.
I guess the bird doesn't really have a way to make sure that the rider is of age. The person who's paying for it has to be of age. And I don't remember what it says in their contract that you're not going to let it. Does it say you're not going to allow somebody else? I paid for it, tried it just to try it out, rode it a minute, gave it to my daughter, and then she rode it around. Now she's 22. My son is 11. He wanted to ride it, and I didn't let him, but I easily could have. Next time, because I still have some balance. So I guess I'd just be careful with the wording,
Yep.
because they do not have a way, that's the point, of making sure that the rider is a licensed driver.
You're right. The tech isn't there where they do a thumbprint or an eye
Right.
scan to verify that you're 16
So I think
or
putting that
18.
in the
Yeah.
RFP might kind of give that impression that there really is that technology, and we don't have that now. So we just need to be careful with the verbiage on that. That's my opinion.
Madam Mayor, Councilwoman Mylum, what Caleb is getting after, and the basis for this, is if we are going to utilize that information as part of our evaluation criteria, which is what happened last year, it really should be in the RFP. Now, how we word it, we can work on how we word it to where we're not asking for something that isn't currently available. But if they are going to be evaluated on some method of trying to keep underage riders off of them, we need to include that in the request and in the evaluation criteria itself.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Mylum.
Keith, I don't have a problem with that. All I'm saying is be careful how you word it,
sure.
because we do
Sure.
not have that. What he just said is not what we have right now, because they cannot guarantee that the rider is going to be licensed. Bird's technology can't do that. So I just don't want to make the competition unfair either.
Any other comments from council?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Kavner.
comment first, and then maybe a question for Caleb. Comment, just answering your question about a 3-year term. I don't think that's something I'm super excited about. I think we're still learning a lot about this technology and its longevity, and I worry about committing to some type of a 3-year program this early in the stages. My question is about the fee, the $25,000. I think when that number was developed, it was designed to capture the cost of staff time to administer and run the program. And I'm just curious, again, I don't know, I'm kind of just directing this out there to the administrative side. Is that dollar amount too high, too low? We don't know. It's hard because we've only got one versus two. I mean, help me understand if that dollar amount that we've decided upon is appropriate.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh. So we do track in that database I mentioned last time, when we get a complaint, how much time we spent with that. I don't have it in front of me, but it was only like 2 hours. That said, we've spent a whole lot of time behind the scenes on developing contracts, administering, answering questions, setting up websites, all kinds of, and I'm one, right? And we don't ask others to track exactly how much time they're spending. Kind of to your point about in year 2 and 3 and 4, I hope to see the amount, this sort of just runs itself. And we deal with complaints every so often, and so maybe the $25,000 is too much. We had a smaller window and we prorated it last year. We've spent, I'll say we've spent more in resources getting this up off the ground and running last year, and even prepping for this next year with Emily and Keith, and we were invested in talking with parks and how they're doing and any change. So we aren't, to answer your question, I can't we aren't accounting for it every minute we spend fully loaded. Here's what it costs us to do this. I would say 25, I would roll with 25 for another year, and we can come back and say, yeah, this thing practically runs itself. Let's cut the fee in half. Or, man, it really's blown up, and we're spending clerk and mine and parks, and everybody's, messing with this all the time. Right now, I don't know how we would justify a change, I guess is my, so I would say let's get a little more data. That was kind of last time. Let's get a little more data. Let's understand a little bit better, and then maybe see if that's enough, too much, or what.
One thing to add, or a couple of things. We definitely don't have enough information for the short time that we actually ran this to actually give you that information and let you know what it would take. But another thing to take into consideration is kind of throwing a monkey wrench into things. If you're anticipating or considering awarding to 2 vendors and $25,000 was too much for one vendor, there's no way that you're going to get 2 vendors to give you 25 for half the work that they got last year. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's a real thing to consider. If one vendor couldn't make it for that, I don't know how you would split their rider share into 2 and make it feasible. If we're going to go through the motion, I'd like to make it worthwhile. I don't think we should ask for something that we probably aren't going to have any chance of getting.
Madam Mayor, to follow up on that, I know when we talked about this a number of months ago, I'd inquired about even if City of Meridian should be in the scooter business, or if it is appropriate for our public transit authority to operate that. I'm just curious, Keith or Caleb, did the team have any further conversations on that, or is the feeling, hey, because we've developed this program, let's run it? Or has there been any consideration about maybe turning it over to another agency, maybe more equipped to handle public transit opportunities?
I think the city staff that discussed this questioned whether it was even feasible. We think, our thought was that's probably part of the reason Bird didn't fully integrate, because it's not feasible for them. They even stated as much to Caleb that it's not something that's justified through any business model. Just because, the cost outweighs their possible earnings from the program.
And maybe just to piggyback a little bit or answer your question, I have not had conversations with VRT, for example, about them. As this program grows, as a bus service grows, I could see, again, down the road, potentially, that making some sense. Right now with the level of bus service we have and this service, it doesn't seem like a nice marriage. There really isn't a reason to have those conversations. So again, just quite frankly, no, I haven't explored that. I will let you know, though, I have had conversations with third-party companies that say, hey, we're interested in this data, and we can help you grow this program. If you charge them a per-ride fee, and you get a piece of that, we can help. So there's companies out there, right, that will help kind of grow this system, and they get paid based on a per ride because the city gets paid on a per ride. So there's this third-party vendor that takes the data, analyzes it, figures out where you can, how you can improve the system. With our fee model, I kind of mentioned this before, and I don't mean to say this but our fee structure is a flat fee. It's set. Yep. Whether 1 ride's made or 100,000 rides are made, the city gets paid the same. So what do we care?
Right.
And I'm not saying that what do we care, but just there really isn't an incentive to hire then a third party to say, let's make this a successful program. So unless we change our fee structure, no one's really interested in, besides the vendor themselves, because they get paid per ride. There really is an incentive. And I'm not advocating necessarily to go to a per ride fee structure, but if you were, that's sort of when we then buy in more to the program as staff and say, yeah, let's make this successful, because now there's some incentive, if you will, not just for the general good of the community, but also bottom line, there's an incentive there, so. Others have reached out to me.
But I think irregardless of that charge, they weren't getting usage.
Right.
And so therein lies the bottom line question is, can you make a program work at this point?
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
This whole thing is hilarious. So I think it was Ronald Reagan that had said, when talking about kind of the left side of the political spectrum. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. We had a rollout, completely privately ran, and they described it as one of their best rollouts ever in the excitement, the usage, and we shut them down. Said, wait, it moves, so let's tax it and regulate it. And now we've taxed it and regulated it nearly to its death. And now we're talking about, oh, well, maybe we can help you get in here with a third party. We'll just take a little bit more from you. And there's a potential opportunity for us to help you build a successful program. Not that, I'm glad it sounds like you're not advocating for that, just mentioning that there's people out there that are willing to do that. But instead, we're talking about still even considering $25,000. As I remember it, this was all something that we did ourselves, that we wanted to take this on and regulate this thing. And so the $25,000, as I remember it, correct me if I'm wrong, was completely there to mitigate the costs that some anticipated were going to come because of problems. As we've had 15 complaints in 2 hours spent, that is a fantastic return on investment. 2 hours of time for $25,000. So to either we are willing to take this on and deal with the contracts and everything and as a service to those that are paying taxes and making sure that it doesn't become a burden on them, or we're not, and we're going to consider the $25,000 as helping pay for all this, and even then it's still way too much. So I'm going away. No doubt the government will continue to screw it up, but my last parting words on this is, hey, I was right. If it's going to be successful, it needs to not have us involved in it.
So easy to say when you have 20/20 sight. So hindsight is awesome. Well, I think the choice in front of council is, do you want to put it out? It goes back to Councilman Kavanaugh's question, is it something the city is interested in doing? Is it our role? And if so, then, or if not, they will go and find another person that can help them, because it is in the public right of way. There's some life safety issues. We're concerned about streetlights, and I'll tell you, the rollout without all the agreements and all the T's crossed and I's dotted probably costs the city more in resources trying to figure it all out and work with all the parties than the $25,000 that we're talking about. So, Council, really what Caleb's standing in front of you is saying, we've come back with the information you've requested, and it's totally up to you on, do we put it out now? Do you want to wait? They're not going to roll it out in the middle of winter. I can guarantee you there won't be any use. But what is your interest? And then staff is just looking for direction on next steps.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Burge?
Thank you, Caleb, and thank you for honestly all the work that you put into us in the preparation and getting us the data that we need. Thank you as always, Keith, for what you've done as well. For me, it just boils down to usage, and that was my concern from the beginning. Are we dense enough? Is there enough people other than teenagers in this area that are riding these shared vehicles? I mean, we don't have a university and we don't have a big downtown area currently, and so it makes it pretty difficult. I would bet that most of the usage in Boise happens in those areas. And so if the usage isn't there and the village is hesitant to have these shared vehicles used on their property, I would agree with Bird in saying that that's the focal point. That's the sort of like the hub of these shared vehicles, and if they're not wanting to have these shared vehicle on their property, it makes it real difficult for this program to succeed, regardless of the amount of whatever the fee is with us. And so my concern, another concern, I don't want you to waste your time on this. I mean, we're about ready to have a comprehensive plan, and there's so many more important things that you're dealing with, and that you need to look at and pay attention to far more than a shared vehicle program in our city. And so, if we're expending our resources on shared vehicles, and if they're appropriate or not, I think it's a complete waste of our time right now, given the lack of resources we have in the planning department. So, my recommendation would be to, I mean, if we have more data to look at that proves me wrong, if there's something out there that I don't know about, then let's take a look at it. But if the data that we have in front of us is what it is, I have no interest in continuing this program.
Councilman Burt?
Mr. President?
Mr. Palmer?
Maybe some clarification on what you're saying. Are you saying disallow them to be used in the city, or are you saying just don't regulate them?
I think that there needs to be some type of fee from Bird. That Bird would, that they should pay in order to cover our resources, and if they're wanting to get bigger, or if we want more vendors to participate, it will create more resources. I mean, I find it hard to believe that Caleb's department has only exhausted 2 hours of their time on this. I know that we've almost talked about that on the dais. So I guarantee you it's been longer than 2 hours that these guys have been dedicating to the success of the shared vehicle program in our city. So I do support a fee, open to the discussion if needs be, whatever that fee is. But it's a program that's being used in our city on our roads. Maybe Councilman Cavanaugh's thought is correct, that maybe this is an issue with BRT. I have no idea. But I don't want to exhaust any more of our resources talking about it. That's for sure.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
Caleb, Keith, do you have a recommendation for council?
No.
That's okay. Sorry. Madam Mayor, it wasn't meant to be a trick question. Just appreciate your subject matter expertise. Madam Mayor, appreciate Councilmember Burnt's comments. I guess, I'm at the place, we've developed the contract, we've developed the mechanism for the RFP. Let's put it out on the street. Let's see what the response is. Allow the committee to vet the process, issue award if warranted, and move forth. But I would hope that maybe we as a body and a new mayor and council can have this conversation in 2020 about what our intention is of a vehicle share program, if we are the most appropriate home, or if there's a better place for this to be located.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Mylum.
I agree with Councilman Cavanagh and the fact that we have all the tools that we've worked all this time, and I guarantee it's a lot more than 2 hours on, putting this together. We're ready, and I don't think it's fair to do a pilot program for less than a year and base the results on that. We don't know why Bird was not successful. Maybe they did a terrible job advertising. That's not our job to determine. If we have vendors that want to participate in the program, then I think we should go forward with the RFP. And as far as the term goes, I'd be more comfortable with a automatic renewal every year, with an option for either party to terminate with a 30 day, 60 day, some kind of notice. That way you don't have to do that RFP every year, but it's not locking anybody into a contract for 3 years. As far as lowering the fees, nobody's been able to answer that question. That's the magic question. So we make it $10,000. Does it depend? Do we do it one price if there's only one vendor, or a different price if there are two vendors? We need to figure that out before you put that out. I guess that's the. Let's just pull a number. Everybody write a number on a paper.
Madam Mayor, Council Member Mylum, council members, When we're talking about a 3-year agreement, we're not locking anyone in. We always have the termination clause for either side. And the one thing is, if you put a multi-year agreement out, it sometimes gives the vendor a little bit more skin in the game. Now, he can actually do this without having to go through the RFP process, because believe it or not, putting proposals together for companies costs money. And we don't want to have them redo this every year, especially if it's the same vendor that's going to do this. So we like to give them the option if everything works well. And if it's not working well, we have the option to negotiate in between those 2 years, from year 2 to 3 and 1 to 2 as well. So I'm in big favor. If we're going to do this, I would recommend doing a multi-year agreement.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Cavanagh.
suggestion. Appreciate the feedback from staff. Good discussion amongst us tonight. We're up against a fairly lengthy meeting that's going to start here in 4 or 5 minutes. Is it prudent to continue this item either to our agenda later on tonight or to a next week? Curious what the body's thoughts are. I would like to marinate on the 3-year proposal. It's something initially I'm not supportive of, but I appreciate your feedback, Keith, and I want to think on that.
Good idea.
Not seeing any reservations or hesitation. Caleb, if we continue this for another week, it's not going to put anything. Okay. Madam Mayor, I move that we continue item 5G to next Tuesday.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue this till next week. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We don't have time for item number 6, so we'll move that. I believe it was already on our next agenda. So we'll just put that on the end of our regular city council meeting. So with that said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Borton.
we adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes. We'll give you 5 minutes.